Right, ladies and gents, what I'll show you today, it's slightly off topic from the build, but you're going to come across this problem anyway, so I thought I'd just show you it right now while I'm waiting for a couple of bits to come from eBay. This is a carburetor that came with this seized up engine. Now, I've loosened a couple of the screws off to speed up the making of the video, and what I've actually done, I've given it a good clean with engine degreaser and a little toothbrush, and you can see it's a fairly clean little job. Now the reason I've cleaned it is because obviously when you're going to strip something down, you don't want to be getting all the grease and gunge in. And the only things that you need to worry about on these carburetors is the float chamber being blocked up and the jets being blocked up. Now you can assume that if your car was running when you took it off the road, there was nothing wrong with the carburetor, because it's very, very seldom that anything ever goes wrong with these. It's like the A-series engine in general. They're very well made and there's nothing much to go wrong with them, and they're very, very basic and simple to use. So for our budget build, what I want you to do is not tamper with this part of the carburetor at all, because this here, the jet part of it, it's a very, very flexible little pipe, and it's a little plastic tube. It fits into the back here, and there's a little brass olive that fits onto it, and I can tell you now, if you try and undo that, you'll never get it back to see it again. You'll end up buying another one. You'll leak fuel out of the bottom of it, and it will never be any good. So it'll cost you money. So leave this jet well alone. Keep your hands away from it, because it's very, very fragile. And this mechanism here, and when you put your foot on the gas, you'll see that the jet moves. So leave that alone. It's working. That's all we need to know. The two things that you can clean up, guys, that are worth doing on the carburetor, obviously when you've cleaned all the body up of it, and I've loosened these off to show you. Your air cleaner housing may very well be a little bit different to this one, but the carburetor, if it's an SU on your engine, it'll be the same sort of carburetor. So you loosen up your two screws. You're left with the gasket for the air cleaner. Now, there's very little to do on these carbs, guys, so just be very careful with them, and you won't have any trouble at all. Keep your hands away from that jet at the bottom. That is quite important, so when you're holding it, try and get your hands away from it. Now, the float chamber, there's 3 screws, and I did loosen them off earlier on, just to speed up the video. But there's nothing much to this at all. These carburetors are really reliable, and this engine, as you know, was a seized engine. But the reason I'm not worried about the carburetor as such is because in order for the engine to seize, the engine must have been running, and if it was running on fuel. So I'm assuming, and I'm quite confident in fact, that there would be nothing wrong with this carburetor, with the exception that it was either running too rich or too weak, and we'll sort that out when we come to get our engine running. So I've took the 3 screws out of the top of the float chamber, and all that does, it lifts off. And underneath the float chamber, you'll see that there's a little gasket. Now, those of you who've got a bit of money to spare, you can buy a carburetor repair kit, and it'll come with a new gasket and maybe a new jet and a couple of other bits and pieces. I don't think you need to worry. If your car was running and you don't think there's a problem with the carburetor, don't spend the money. Wait until the engine's running, then decide if there's a problem with the carburetor. Now, we've got the float out of the float chamber, and there's only one moving part on this, and that's the float itself. You can see the float. What happens is the float chamber sits like that. The float sits inside it. Fuel comes up from the bottom of the engine, and it comes into the float chamber, and the fuel makes the float rise. And there's a little inside the float chamber at the very back of there. I don't know if you can see it on this camera. I'll point to it with the screwdriver. There's a little brass plunger just there, and the float pushes that plunger up, and what it does, it closes the fuel off so that it doesn't flood. Otherwise the carburetor would be flooded all the time. So all I do with these, I just wipe this end where the fuel comes into the top, and give it a blow out, and you can hear the air coming through it. That'll blow any bits of crud and anything out of that thing. Then all you do then, guys, is just press the float close like that and try and blow it again. And obviously nothing comes out. So you know the valve is working correctly. These are very delicate, so don't go raving at them. Just give it a little clean round, polish it round, give it a wipe around with your rag. And that's that part of it done. Inside the bottom of the float chamber, if you look there, there's nothing in there at all. It's an empty float chamber, and that's exactly what it should be like. But if you look down at the bottom of that float chamber, again I'll point it out to you, there's a raised working inside there, a raised part of the casting, just there. And that's raised up about ½ an inch off the bottom of the float chamber. And in each left and right hand side, you'll see like a little trough on each side of that raised part. Now what that's there for is the fuel comes up into the top of the float chamber, and any dirty fuel that's coming over the years into the bottom of your fuel tank, or people haven't changed the fuel filter properly or anything, any fuel, dirty fuel, would come in through the top, through your inlet pipe on the top, into your float chamber, down into the float chamber as such, and then any bits will collect right down in that bottom part, in the bottom, right down in the bottom there. And the raised part, obviously it's higher, so that it can't draw in the dirty fuel that's rested in the bottom of that part down there, in the bottom there. So all your dirty fuel and bits of rust will be down in them bottom corners. So all you do there, guys, is just give yourself a little squirt of carb cleaner in there, and it'll all come out. All the crud will come out. You might need to get in there and poke it out with a pipe cleaner or whatever you want to do, whatever you want to use. Make sure that's all nice and clean, and that's all you need to do on that. There's nothing more you need to worry about. Forget all this, because that'll lead to trouble. Leave that well alone, and we'll come to that later when we're tuning the engine. For this video, it's low maintenance, and so you will obviously clean your car. You'll obviously clean your gasket back up. If you're going to use the same one, make sure it's nice and clean, and you may very well use a little bit of gasket sealer, fuel-proof gasket sealer, which I'm going to use on this one because I'm using this carburetor again. But for this video, I'm just going to show you quickly how to reassemble it. Put the float back in, make sure you don't damage it putting it back in. Press it down, there's a little lip on it, so it's got to seat right in the right place. Get your 3 screws, put your 3 screws back in. There's nothing going to jump out and bite you on these carburetors. You don't need to make a big fuss of it. All we're doing, remember guys, is don't take anything apart unless we can improve on it. And we know that the carburetor was probably working because they very, very seldom go wrong. So all we're doing this time is just cleaning out the important parts, because when it does run, we don't want it to be clogging up with rust. You know, if your engine's been stood a while, or it's one that you're restoring, it might be a lot more dirty inside. So we're just cleaning it. That's all we're doing. We're assuming it functions, but we're just cleaning it. Now I'm not tightening them up because I'm going to take them off again and seal it all up, because this carburetor I use on different engines. I'm going to be using it for my rebuilds of all my engines, so I'll be using it on several ones. So I'm going to seal that up and make sure it's right. So that's that part of it done, lads. So the next part we'll come to, we take off the little plunger on the top, and I'll tell you all about that shortly. That's a little brass plunger. There's nothing to worry about there. Nothing's going to jump out on you. And there's 2 little screws each side of the housing. Just get those out. I did loosen these off, lads, so it just makes the video go a little bit quicker. I know they can be a little bit boring, but I'm hoping I don't bore you. I'd like to thank everybody as well. I've just got 100 on my subscriptions, and I'm really, really pleased that there's enough interest in it for me to keep on making them. And thanks to everybody who was commented and liked the videos, and I really do appreciate it. Thanks very much. So there's 2 screws holding that in. You may or may not have a little spring washer beneath them 2 screws, depending on how many times your carburetor has been destroyed over the years. It doesn't make any difference whether they're there or not. You can lift off that housing and you'll see that there's a little spring inside. There's nothing in that housing at all. Just give it a wipe round inside. If you're a purist and you want it spotlessly new, and give it some carb cleaner. You don't need to worry about it. It's not doing anything. Don't worry about it. This isn't a bed spring. It's a very soft spring, and you might think it's not doing anything at all. And to be perfectly honest, it doesn't do very much at all. So there's that little spring. That's all the only thing you need to worry about in there. You'll find that you can lift that part of the body out of the carburetor. Don't bend this pin, lads. Don't bend that little pin, because that pin fits down into your main jet. So all you're doing here, you're just going to give it a little bit of a wipe round inside this tube it's got some oil, and I'll tell you about that when we put it back together. So just give the thing a clean. Make sure this edge is nice and clean, this edge around here. Not wipe around there. Wipe around here, make sure it's nice and clean. Don't bend this little brass pin here, lads. Little needle there, don't bend that. Don't dismantle it either, just make sure it's nice and clean. Carb cleaner if you've got it. Wipe down with gunk or whatever else you've got. It's not important, just make sure it's clean. Set that aside. Then we're left with the main body of the carb. Now, you can get your finger in there, give it a clean round, put your rag in, squirt it with your carb cleaner, just give it a little squirt round. And in the bottom of there is your jet. And that jet there is part of this here, which we're not going to dismantle because we're assuming the engine is going to be running. We can set the mixture rich or weak when we know that the engine's running. So don't do anything more than just give it a clean. If you see any bits of crud in there, just give them a scrape out. You're not going to do any damage. Get your toothbrush in there, get your carb cleaner in there, give it a little wipe down. I will do all this again a little bit better than this, lads, when I come to doing it. But we'll assume that that's all nice and clean. This is your choke. This part here, this lever here is your choke. When you pull your choke on the morning, for those of you who knows what a choke is, it makes the mixture richer in the carburetor because it stops air getting drawn in through your air cleaner. Your air cleaner's here. It draws air in there, and that stops that air getting into your carb. So what your carb's running on then drawing into the engine is pure fuel, and it's a stronger mixture, so it fires up easier in the morning when it's cold. As soon as it gets warm and you open your choke manually, your cars nowadays will have automatic chokes, but they're doing the same thing. It'll open up, and that in turn then draws more air in, and it makes the mixture in the carburetor weaker. So that's what that does. I did dismantle that part of it. One nut, that's all I took off this carburetor to clean around the inside there because I could get into it easier when that wasn't on there. So take a photograph of it if you're going to take those bits off. Make sure you get them back the right way. But I only took that off. That's the only thing I took off there because it was just the choke. And I didn't interfere with any of the settings on anything else. Just cleaned them up. So right, so we've cleaned that up, guys, and we've just give it a little squirt down the bottom if you're conscientious enough, you want to clean that. We are assuming that this carburetor is working, and I've got every confidence that it probably is working because, like I said, if the engine seized up, it was running. So I'm assuming it's running. But you'll make a better job of that, and I will clean that a little bit better when we've got finished it. So we'll assume that that's a lot cleaner now, lads. Now we can just replace the little needle in there, and that just fits down into that little recess in the hole there. Just put your little thing in there, and you'll see there's a little groove on the side of this. You'll see there's a little groove on the side. What you need to do is make sure that that lines up with a little. There's a little protrusion there, look, that comes into the body, and that little, the engineers think, well, we'll put that in, and then the lads can get it the right way around. So think of everything. They're very simple, and they think of everything. So it'll only go, look, you can twist it, and it'll drop in when it's in the right place. And that's just got to be free moving. Just make sure it's not stiff. If it's stiff, it's because it's got caked up with carbon around the edges here. But there's no carbon on this one, so we're all right. And it'll just move up and down like that. And what happens is when you put your foot on the gas, when you're driving your car, you put your foot on the gas, it alters that. It alters the distance between that little plunger at the bottom and your main jet. That's what it does. It makes your mixture. It allows for more fuel to come up into the carburetor. So on top of that, we put the spring. Just be careful with this spring. It's very, very soft. It's a very, very soft spring. Just drop it on. And inside the body of the thing, you'll see that there's like a little tube built into it. And that tube, you've got to make sure that the spring is on the outside of that tube. Don't kink it. Don't kink your spring so that it's bending over like that when you're putting it together. You must make sure that that spring goes inside that tube. And then just gently drop your just gently drop it on. You see the spring's holding it up, look. That's how much pressure there is on it. It's just holding, it's not even holding that up, look. It is actually dropping it down. And I'll tell you what that's all about. So all you do is make sure that that's located back into the body of the thing. Put your two screws back in. There's no gasket on that, by the way. There isn't a gasket on that, so don't think you've lost my gasket, because you haven't. There isn't a gasket on there. And just nip that down. I'm not screwing them right down. You notice I just remember the motto, put me on my fingers first, which I did. So just give them a nip down. I'm only nipping them just down, lads, so I don't lose them when I come to move this carburetor out, and I'll do some work on it later on. So now we'll come back to the plunger. In the top of the plunger, you'll see there's the tube that was on the inside of the other thing. It's got a little recess in it. Now what you do there, you fill that with 3-in-1 oil or engine oil. Just drop a bit of oil in up to the top of that level, and then you drop this plunger in, and what that plunger does, it stops it surging the carburetor. If I open that choke up, the base of that if I open that carb up, where the brass needle valve went in, it goes down the bottom, and the bottom of that thing there, it lifts up. When you're driving, the air gets through, and it lifts that up. It lifts that body up inside, and that spring stops it from just bouncing right up and down. There's no air in it at the moment, so you can see it. It's moving. I don't think you can see it there. It moves up and down there. Look, you can just see it, and that stops it moving, flapping about like that, because there's no oil in it. But when that's full of oil, it dampens it. That's the damper. And usually when you take that off, you'll hear it'll slurp, because there's still a bit of oil left in there. But when it's full of oil, it'll slurp even more, and then it'll stop it down. Oh, I'll just put a bit of oil in for you, lad. Just squirt a bit of oil in it like that, look. And that damper will have some force in it then. It's not as easy to put down. And it just stops that from flapping about inside. It doesn't move now. So there you go. So that's what that is. So that's all there is to it. That's your carburetor. You don't need to do any more than that, because all you'll do is open a can of worms up, and you don't need to do it, because I'll be very, very surprised if your carburetor has got anything wrong with it, other than the fact that it might be running weak or rich. So you're just going to clean it up, and that's about as good as it gets anyway. You can polish that up all you want, but you haven't got a new car. We can make the engine look like new, but you'll never make these ancillaries like new, because they're just corroded over time, unless you're polishing them and all that, and you'll never get them to look like new. And to be perfectly honest, by the time that's on the car and you've got your air cleaner on it, it's mainly out of sight. But what you know for good is that you've cleaned the part. You've improved on it, because it was dirty and you've cleaned it inside. You don't need to tamper with any of this, because we can set the mixture on the engine at some other point. But that particular valve there, that will wind in and out, and weaken and enrich the mixture accordingly. And we'll sort all that out on a different video when we come to run the car. But assuming that the carburetor is functioning, which 99.9% of the time it will be, that's how you would clean it. Don't do any more than that. It's cost nothing. Your time's cost nothing. You haven't had to buy anything, and you've got a clean carburetor that you can knowingly put on your car engine, and you'll soon see whether the fuel's getting to the plugs or not. And that's all you need to worry about right now. So I hope it hasn't bored you. Thanks to everybody who has subscribed. Thanks for all the interest, and thanks for the lovely comments that I'm getting. I really do appreciate it. And John, I did send you a little message about the parts. So look forward to meeting you all again on the future videos. So thanks very much again, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So thanks for watching, and if you like it, subscribe. Thank you.